Ethan Mallory once believed that the soft yellow glow of this small diner was the dream of his life. But tonight, under that very glow, everything seemed too bright, too quiet, to the point of being frightening. He sat alone at a corner table, back straight, hands resting lightly on the edge of the white tablecloth. His eyes flickered across the rows of tables, past the easy smiles and sharp laughter of strangers who somehow seemed to know exactly when to laugh. He had once been the boy mopping floors in this very place, looking up at the yellow lights reflecting in the tears of his mother as she handed him a cold piece of bread for dinner. He had promised her he would turn the dream into reality, that he would make this place a home for people hungry for a chance. And Ethan had done it. Mallory's table had expanded across 3 states, with magazines calling it a culinary miracle for America's working class. But tonight, as Ethan wore an old dark shirt and pulled a cap low over the face that once graced Forbes magazine, sitting alone in the restaurant bearing his name, he wasn't sure what was real anymore. A stranger of a waitress approached, placing a neatly folded napkin next to his bread plate. No eye contact, no greeting, just the napkin. Ethan looked at it, took a deep breath, and opened it. Something's about to happen. Don't react. Just 6 words, scribbled in black ink. But the air around Ethan froze instantly. He could hear his own breathing, every clink of a spoon against glass striking his ears like a hammer. Someone was watching him. Someone knew he would be here, right at this moment. In that instant, memories rushed back like cold water, his mother crying in the dark as the landlord pounded on the door for rent, nights of scrubbing dishes until his hands bled. The day he signed the lease for his first restaurant with bloodshot eyes from sleepless nights, but a heart full of hope. And then, the image of Ethan's brother, Mason, appeared, the brother who had stood by him through every hardship, who had died in a fire at their first restaurant 8 years ago. Ethan had cried himself dry by Mason's photo, believing life had stolen the only person who understood and loved him unconditionally. But tonight, reading the note with those strange words, Ethan felt everything become uncertain. A chill crept down his spine as he remembered the anonymous email he had received 3 weeks ago. You need to see what they're doing. No name, no greeting. Just a short message with 6 blurry photos, an employee texting during a shift, a server slipping something into a customer's drink, a cook stuffing cash into his pocket. And the final line, "They think you're a joke." Ethan had spent sleepless nights staring at those photos, wondering if he was being played, or if something was truly rotting inside the empire he had built with every ounce of his youth. But one last photo shattered the last of his doubts, a man with a faint scar on his left cheek, his posture heartbreakingly familiar, standing in front of a stove with cold eyes. Ethan knew that silhouette. Mason. No way. Ethan whispered, his fingers trembling as they clenched the paper. Mason was dead. He had laid Mason to rest with his own hands, watched the coffin lower into the ground, and promised to live for Mason's share. But if Mason was alive, then everything Ethan knew about life, about brotherhood, about trust, could be nothing but a grand illusion. Outside the glass window, the sign of Mallory's table reflected the glow of the streetlights. golden and proud, like the childhood dream Ethan once held. But tonight, it felt like it was shining into the darkest corners of his soul, reminding him of the promise he made to his mother, of the brother he had lost, and of a truth that could destroy everything. Ethan gently tightened his grip on the note, eyes following the laughing customers and bustling staff, all appearing normal. But it was precisely that normalcy that terrified him most. Because tonight, Ethan Mallory would have to face the truth, and that truth might be the deepest pain he had ever known. Ethan tried to steady his breathing, placing his hands on the table to stop them from trembling. He lifted his water glass, his finger tapping lightly against the rim with a small ting, just enough to remind himself to stay alert. Tonight wasn't an ordinary night, and he was no longer just the restaurant owner enjoying a meal. He was being watched. Another server approached. A young woman with a smile that seemed too practiced, placing another neatly folded napkin in front of him, just like the last. No eye contact, no words, just a silent gesture before she walked away. Ethan glanced around the room, his eyes brushing past smiling faces, raised wine glasses, and phones laid on tables with their cameras subtly aimed at him. He opened the napkin. The words appeared. Simple but cold. Don't look around. Cameras are everywhere. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He lifted his head slightly but kept his gaze unfocused, pretending to enjoy the ambience. Couples were laughing too loudly. A man sat alone at the bar, glancing over at him repeatedly, and a young couple nearby had their phone tilted just enough for the camera to point directly at Ethan. He bit the inside of his cheek to keep his face neutral. Act, Ethan. Act like you don't know, he told himself. In front of him was a glass of red wine, the light reflecting off the dark liquid like streaks of blood. He looked at it, remembering nights when Mason and he drank cheap red wine in a musty apartment, dreaming of the day they would open their first restaurant, of a life where they no longer had to fear tomorrow. He never thought there would come a day when he would sit here, doubting the brother he had wept for until exhaustion took him. He wasn't sure if Mason was truly alive, but a part of him, the part that no longer believed in the safety of this world, knew it could be true. A voice snapped him out of his thoughts. "Are you ready to order?" "Sir," a woman's voice, soft, steady, emotionless. Ethan turned, and in that moment, his heart nearly stopped. It was Chloe, one of the employees he trusted most, who had worked with him since the very first year Mallory's table opened. She had once been a college student working part-time, who had cried when Ethan gave her a raise large enough to pay off her senior year's tuition. He still remembered her radiant smile the day she held up her diploma and returned to work for him full-time, saying this place was her family. But tonight, Chloe didn't recognize him. Her eyes were empty, her smile stiff, her hands folded behind her back in perfect server posture, void of warmth or familiarity. "I'll have a rare steak, mixed salad, and a glass of water," Ethan replied, his voice hoarse but calm. "Yes, sir," Chloe said, nodding before turning away. walking with steps so precise they seemed robotic. Ethan watched her, his hand gripping the napkin so tightly his knuckles turned white. That was not the Chloe he knew. Those eyes couldn't be hers. A fear mixed with anger surged within Ethan. If they could turn Chloe into a stranger, what else could they do to the people he loved, to the very dream he had built? He pulled out his phone, staring at the dark screen reflecting his tired face. The last message he had received from an unknown number appeared. "Tonight, you'll see everything." Ethan clenched his phone, his eyes sharpening with sudden resolve. If this was a trap, if this was the truth he needed to face, then he would not run. Because Ethan Mallory had survived the harshest days, had walked through nights with nothing but hope. He would not let anyone, be it Mason or whoever was hiding in the shadows, steal the only thing he still had the courage to face the truth. Ethan lifted his head, took a deep breath, and looked around the room with a feigned calm. But in his eyes, a fire had ignited. Dinner was served with eerie precision. The steak was placed perfectly, the salad arranged neatly, the glass of water without a single drop spilled. Ethan looked at the plate, seeing his own reflection in the polished silver knife, warped and unfamiliar. He picked up the knife, slicing into the steak with deliberate movements, his eyes never leaving the faces around him. Something was wrong. The smiles, the glances, the laughter mixed with the clinking of glasses, they were all in sync, too perfectly timed, as if the entire room was performing a well-rehearsed play. In the corner, a middle-aged man pretended to scroll on his phone, but a tiny camera lens peeked out from his phone case, aimed directly at Ethan. A young couple giggled, their hands intertwined, but their eyes darted toward him repeatedly, while their phone on the table faced him, its tiny light blinking, recording. Ethan chewed slowly, the rich aroma of the grilled steak tasteless as it slid down his throat. Inside him was a storm of suspicion, pain, and anger. The people he had trusted, had called family within this restaurant chain, were they part of this performance? He remembered the anonymous messages, the blurry photos, the man with the scar on his cheek. Mason, his brother, the man he once shared crusts of bread with on cold, rainy nights. The man who had died in that fire 8 years ago. If Mason was alive, if Mason was behind all of this, then why? Ethan set down the knife, his hand trembling slightly, closing his eyes as he took a deep breath. He remembered their mother's eyes, eyes that always forgave, always hoped, no matter how cruel life became. He had promised her he would protect Mason, that he would never let Mason be hurt. But if Mason had betrayed everything, Ethan would have to protect this dream, protect the people who still believed in this place at any cost. A loud burst of laughter erupted from a table near the bar, snapping Ethan's eyes open. A woman had jumped to her feet, her shrill voice cutting through the air. "Oh my God, what is this?" Every pair of eyes in the restaurant turned toward her, her cream-colored dress speckled with red stains from a spilled glass of wine. The server nearby fumbled an apology, movements clumsy in a strange, deliberate way, as if they were acting. The woman continued to shriek, holding her phone high, live-streaming, the title glowing across the screen, "Famous Restaurant Disrespects Customer. Terrible Service." Ethan saw his reflection in the phone screen as the camera panned past him. He saw himself, sitting quietly, eyes staring forward unblinking, while inside, his heart thundered wildly. No one approached the screaming customer to apologize. No one called for a manager. Everyone simply stood, recording, taking pictures. A cold chill crawled down Ethan's spine. This wasn't an accident. This was a staged scene. At that moment, a sharp male voice rang out from another nearby table. "This is food. It's ice cold, like a damn rock." The man slammed his plate onto the table. Food scattering, bits of salad dropping to the floor. People around them began to murmur. More phones raised, filming close-ups of Ethan's face. Another woman covered her mouth, pretending to gag, her eyes glancing at Ethan through her fingers. Ethan clenched his fist under the table, his nails digging into his palms so hard it hurt. He understood now. None of this was random. This was a performance, a scripted live stream designed to take down Ethan Mallory, to take down Mallory's table, to turn him into a villain in front of thousands watching the live stream before he even had a chance to speak. "Don't react," Ethan reminded himself, recalling the words on the note. They wanted him to lose control. They wanted him to react so they could edit and twist a moment of anger into proof that he was the monster they claimed him to be. Ethan looked around at the unfamiliar faces, the phones recording, the fake smiles. And in that moment, he saw Chloe standing at the bar, her eyes glancing at him for just a second. And in that brief look, he saw fear, a silent plea for help. Ethan understood she hadn't willingly joined this performance. And in that single moment, Ethan Mallory knew he couldn't afford to break down, couldn't afford a single wrong move. Because tonight, he wasn't just fighting for his own dignity, but for the people who still placed their hopes in him. For people like Chloe forced into darkness, waiting for someone to stand up and save them from this nightmare. Ethan straightened his back, lifted his glass of water, took a sip, and set it down gently. He looked directly into the camera aimed at him, his gaze calm, but inside, a vow was being carved deep. Ethan set the glass down, leaving a faint ring of water on the dark wooden table. He stared at that ring, a cold, hollow loneliness rising in his chest. Everything that had once been familiar in this place had now become the stage for a dark play he never asked to be in. In the distance, the woman with the wine-stained dress was still screaming, her voice raspy, but her eyes dry, without a single tear. A man from the next table stepped forward, shoving his phone in her face, asking in an exaggerated tone, "How do you feel being treated this way at a so-called luxury restaurant?" She turned to the camera, her expression twisting, her voice switching to a sob. "I've never been humiliated like this in my life. I'm going to sue. I'm live streaming so everyone can see the truth about this place." Ethan held back a sigh, his eyes scanning the people around him. It was all too perfect, too synchronized, just like scenes from a carefully staged reality show. The customers pretended to be shocked, holding up their phones, filming, live streaming, but their eyes were indifferent, devoid of any genuine concern. He looked toward the bar where Chloe stood, her hand clutching a cleaning cloth tightly, her eyes meeting his for a fleeting moment before she turned away. In that short second, Ethan saw fear, worry, and something like a silent cry for help in her eyes. The clatter of metal hitting the floor rang out, drawing everyone's attention. Another server, hands trembling, had just dropped a tray of food, sauce splattering, some of it landing on the skirt of a customer who was live streaming. The woman screamed, shoving her phone into the pale, terrified face of the server. "Look at this. This is how they treat customers. This is the quality of Mallory's table." Whispers began to spread across the room. "Get the manager out here," a man's voice barked. "This is a disaster," another voice chimed in. The sounds of photos being snapped, live stream buttons being pressed, mixed with the smell of food, wine, and the artificial anger that hung in the air. Ethan took a deep breath, keeping his face neutral. He realized they were cornering him. One wrong move, one moment of anger, one wrong word, and it would all become the evidence they needed to destroy him on social media. He tilted his head slightly, catching sight of a phone in the hands of a man recording him. On the screen, Ethan's face appeared calm, eyes sharp, unafraid. Ethan knew they were waiting for him to lose it, to slam the table, to snap, so they could edit the clip the way they wanted. At that moment, a server placed a small envelope beside Ethan's plate. No words, no eye contact, just a quick drop before they walked away. Ethan glanced around, then discreetly picked up the envelope, hiding it under his napkin, opening it under the table. Inside was a small slip of paper, the handwriting instantly familiar. "I'm recording everything from another angle. Don't react. Wait for the signal." Ethan recognized Chloe's handwriting. His heart clenched for a moment, then settled into a steadier rhythm. He wasn't alone. A deep, sharp voice rang out behind Ethan. "That's enough!" Ethan turned around, seeing a tall man in a grey suit, sharp eyes, a faint scar running down his left cheek. For a moment, Ethan felt like he couldn't breathe. Mason, the brother he thought had died in that fire all those years ago, now standing before him, with a face no longer carrying the gentle smile of the past, replaced by coldness and power. Mason looked directly into Ethan's eyes, the corner of his mouth twisting into a mocking smile. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers. Instantly, the screaming stopped. Everyone froze. Cameras all aimed at Ethan. A second later, the noise resumed, but this time as whispers, as sharp accusations. "That's him. He doesn't even apologize. Record it. Get all of it." Ethan stared back at Mason, fear gone from his eyes. They wanted him to break now. But Ethan knew this moment would decide everything. He lifted his water glass, took a sip, set it down, his eyes never leaving Mason's. No one in the room knew they were brothers. No one knew Ethan was looking at the man who once shared with him the last scraps of bread, the last few coins, the unfinished dreams. No one knew this moment was Ethan's final battle, not just to protect Mallory's table, but to reclaim the truth buried under a mountain of lies. Ethan nodded slightly, his eyes lighting up, his lips moving without sound. The air inside Mallory's table was so heavy that Ethan could hear his heartbeat, each beat pounding like a hammer against his chest. He sat there, back straight, hands clasped together on the table, eyes locked on Mason, the brother he once thought had died in the fire, now standing before him with the cold eyes of a stranger. Around them, phones were still raised, lenses shifting back and forth, cruel whispers slicing the air like winter wind. Get his face. He's scared. See that? That's the selfish owner right there. Ethan took a deep breath, suppressing the slight tremor in his fingers. He knew. One slip of control, a frown, a single angry word, and it would all be the evidence they needed to destroy him. Mason stepped closer, now only a table's distance between them. He smirked, his eyes sweeping over Ethan before settling, his voice low, meant for only the two of them. You never knew when to stop, did you, Ethan? His voice still had that slight rasp, but it was cold, steady, emotionless. Ethan swallowed, looking him dead in the eye. I did stop. Mason, the day you died, I stopped everything to mourn you. Mason's lip twitched, the corner of his mouth jerking slightly. You cried because you thought I was dead. But I was never dead. Ethan, I just disappeared from that cheap dream you clung to. Those words cut into Ethan's chest like a blade. He remembered the nights he and Mason slept on the restaurant floor, sharing scraps of dry bread, dreaming of the day they could hang a Mallory's table sign under shimmering yellow lights. They had sworn they would never leave each other. But now, Mason stood in front of him, smirking, hands shoved into his pockets, as if admiring a new toy he had just broken. A server passed by with a tray, bumping lightly into Mason. A glass fell, shattering on the floor with a sharp crash. The sound sliced through the hush, and instantly every phone turned toward Ethan, waiting for his reaction. Ethan didn't move. He looked at the shards of glass at his feet, reflecting the yellow lights, like frozen drops of blood, glistening. He lifted his gaze, staring directly at Mason, his voice low, steady, unwavering. What the hell are you doing? Mason chuckled, gesturing to a woman live-streaming nearby. She nodded, stepped back, and turned her camera directly toward Ethan. Mason spoke, loud enough for everyone to hear. He's putting on a show, fancy, kind-hearted owner, but in reality, he's a greedy bastard, forcing employees to work overtime without pay, crushing the working people. The whispers erupted again, louder, sharper. Ethan saw a man sitting near the door, secretly recording, his face full of smug satisfaction. Ethan clenched his fist, tendons visible, but kept his voice calm. Mason, you know that's not the truth. Mason tilted his head, narrowing his eyes. The truth. And what is the truth? Ethan, that you live off other people's backs, scraping every dollar from your employees' sweat, while you sit here having a luxury dinner. Mason's voice rose, catching the air in the room. A few people nodded, zooming in on Ethan's face with their phones. In that moment, Ethan knew they were waiting for him to react, to stand up, slam the table, yell like the greedy boss they wanted him to be. But Ethan didn't do that. He stared straight at Mason, his voice dropping to a knife-sharp whisper. "You want to destroy me, don't you? You want to tear down Mallory's table. For what?" Mason. A flicker crossed Mason's eyes, just for a split second, like a flash of light before disappearing. He stepped back, smirking, but the smile was no longer natural. "To teach you humility, Ethan," Mason said, his voice even but quivering on the last word. At that moment, Chloe approached, placing a new glass of water on Ethan's table. As she set it down, her hand brushed the back of his, leaving a small folded note in his palm. Ethan held on to it, not letting it show, his eyes still on Mason. Mason saw, but didn't react, only tilted his head, his gaze full of contempt, before turning away, disappearing into the crowd, filming and live-streaming with titles like "Restaurant Owner Exposed, Live Drama Explodes at Mallory's Table. Watch how this guy reacts." Ethan carefully opened the note, the handwriting small, the letters slightly shaky. "Kitchen cameras got everything. I'll send the signal when ready." Ethan's heart thumped once, then settled into a calm rhythm. Chloe was helping him. There would be evidence. There would be truth. Ethan lifted his head, looking around the room, now like a silent arena, the yellow lights illuminating the fake faces, the phones filming like the eyes of predators. Ethan's eyes sharpened, scanning the bustling room filled with whispers and shaking phone cameras zooming in on his face. He remained still, shoulders steady, eyes unblinking, every muscle in his face taut as a wire. In his palm, the note Chloe had slipped him still held warmth. The short message, like a small flame, lighting up the darkness inside Ethan kitchen cameras, got everything. "I'll send the signal when ready." Ethan squeezed the note, the warmth of his fingers turning into a silent promise. "Hold on, Chloe." Mason had disappeared into the crowd, but Ethan knew he was still watching, perhaps from a hidden corner, perhaps through a hidden camera, perhaps through the gloating phones live-streaming every second. A middle-aged woman stood up, shoving her phone at Ethan, her voice shrill. "What's this owner still sitting here for? You think you're the victim here. Answer. Answer for the thousands watching this live stream." Ethan turned his face toward her, his eyes meeting the camera lens, the light from it casting shadows on his weary yet unyielding features. He gave a slight smile, a smile that made the woman pause for a second, her hand trembling, the camera shaking. Ethan said nothing. He simply turned back to his glass, took a sip, exhaled softly, as if all the chaos around him was nothing but a faint echo, not worth his attention. At that moment, the phone in his pocket buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Ready." Ethan's heart thumped hard. He looked around, searching for Chloe, and caught her gaze from across the bar. She nodded slightly, a nod of encouragement, a beam of light in the storm of chaos. Ethan stood up, the chair scraping the floor with a dry creak, silencing the room for a few seconds. All cameras turned to him, eager eyes, fingers gripping phones tightly. Ethan reached into his coat pocket, pulled out his phone, turned on the front camera, looked straight into the lens, and pressed Go Live. The words, "You are now live," appeared. The viewer count climbing rapidly. 220, 200, 1500. Ethan took a breath, his voice low, clear, echoing across the room. "I know all of you are recording me. Good. Because I'm recording you too." Whispers exploded, some people looking down to check the live stream, a few smirking, some eyes darting nervously toward the door. Ethan raised his phone, panning the camera across the room, the customers performing, the hidden cameras, the faces trying to mask their panic. "I'm Ethan Mallory, founder of Mallory's Table, and I have never been afraid to speak the truth." At that moment, his phone received a video file from Chloe. Ethan opened the file, holding it up to the live stream camera. It was footage from the kitchen camera, clear and crisp. Mason standing in the middle of Mallory's Table's kitchen, surrounded by a group of people, the same customers currently live streaming in the restaurant. Mason was handing out white envelopes, pointing, instructing them on what to do. His voice echoed, cold, clear. "Start at 7:30. Spill the wine on her dress. Scream." 7:45. That guy stands up and yells about cold food. At 800, start live streaming, bad-mouthing Ethan. "You understand. Don't worry. You'll get paid." The restaurant fell silent. Some people live streaming turned their cameras away, shaking, and turned off their streams. A few scrambled to stand up, trying to slip toward the door. The phones that had been raised began to lower, their owners' eyes wide with panic as they realized they were being live-streamed in return. Ethan looked directly into his phone's camera, his voice firm, decisive. "This is the truth. These are the people destroying the peace of a community. This is how they stage a performance to destroy the work, dignity, and dreams of honest working people." He panned the camera to the bar where Chloe stood, her hands clenched, her eyes shining with hope. Ethan nodded at her, a silent thank you. "Mallory's Table isn't perfect, but we have never betrayed anyone's trust. I will not stay silent. The truth will not stay silent." A shout erupted near the door. "He's lying. He faked that video." Ethan turned the camera back to himself, his gaze sharp as a blade. "If I faked it, sue me. But you know I didn't." The real customers, who had been silent until now, began to clap, a small ripple of applause that thundered through the heavy air. On the live stream, viewers surged, comments flooding in, "Stand up for the truth. Ethan, don't stay silent. You're right. This is the real story we need to see." Ethan ended the live stream, put his phone away, lifted his face to look around the room, and exhaled deeply. Applause echoed throughout the restaurant, crisp claps, one after another, ringing out from the real customers who had been sitting quietly. Ethan looked around, seeing the faces he recognized, the regulars who came to Mallory's Table for the chicken soup and the warm atmosphere, nodding, clapping, looking at him with encouraging eyes. His phone buzzed again. notifications flooding in. We believe in you. Don't let them kill the truth. We'll stand with you. Ethan put away his phone, taking a deep breath. He knew Mason was still here. He could feel Mason's eyes on him from somewhere, like a wolf watching its prey for the slightest slip. "What do you want, Mason?" Ethan whispered, scanning the room, his voice hoarse but firm. And then he saw him. Mason stood in the far corner, near the entrance to the kitchen, arms crossed over his chest, the corner of his mouth curling into a half-smile. His stance was exactly the same as it was years ago, when they worked late into the night together. But his eyes were different, cold, arrogant, and filled with challenge. Ethan walked steadily toward Mason. The whispers died, leaving only the sound of Ethan's footsteps, steady and deliberate, like the drum beat of war. "Stay right there, Ethan," Mason said, his voice deep and cold, arms still crossed. "You don't want to make a scene." Ethan stopped, standing just an arm's length away from Mason. Two men, faces alike with strong jawlines and faint lines at the corners of their eyes, but one carried the pain of loss, while the other bore the ambition tainted by betrayal. "What have you done?" Mason, Ethan asked, his voice calm, eyes locked on his brother's icy stare. "I'm just giving you back what you owe me," Mason sneered, tilting his head slightly. "You thought I died in that fire, didn't you?" You went on, expanding the restaurant, becoming the working-class hero while I had to fake my death, to disappear. You want to humiliate me in public, just for revenge." Ethan's hand clenched tighter, his voice dropping lower. "No, Ethan, I want you to understand that everything you have because of me. That sauce recipe, the community-style service idea, the entire feel of Mallory's table, we created it together. But when I was gone, you took all the glory." Mason's voice rose, his eyes blazing with anger and pain. People around them lowered their phones, stopped live streaming, listening. The entire world was listening. "I searched for you everywhere, Mason," Ethan said, his voice trembling slightly. "I cried when I brought your photo home. I thought I lost you forever. I never forgot what you did." "Don't you dare put on that act," Mason roared, his fists clenching, eyes bloodshot. "I was left behind. Ethan, I didn't die in that fire, but I died in your mind, while you let yourself become a wealthy owner, while I lived like a ghost." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them, wet but steady. "I'm sorry, Mason." A single moment of silence. Mason froze, his fists loosening, his eyes flickering in that instant, his lips moving without words. "I'm sorry I couldn't find you. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. I'm sorry I didn't know you were alive, so I could say this sooner." The air was dead quiet. People looked at Ethan, at Mason, then at each other, unsure of how to react. But Mason didn't cry. He let out a cold, dry laugh, stepping back. "Sorry," Mason scoffed. "Too late. Ethan, tonight will be the last night for Mallory's table. I'm going to destroy everything you've built." And he pulled out his phone, holding it high, showing a collection of edited videos, spliced moments of Ethan looking angry, staged images meant to ruin him. With sensational titles, Ethan Mallory's true colors revealed: luxury owner, insults, poor customers, Mallory's table exposed. All I have to do is hit this button, and it will spread across social media in minutes, Mason said, his finger hovering over the post button. Ethan looked straight into his brother's eyes, his gaze calm and chilling. He pulled out his own phone, opening the video Chloe had sent him. The footage of Mason handing out envelopes and directing people to stage the scenes. Ethan held his phone high, looking into Mason's eyes, his voice ringing out clearly, loud enough for all to hear. Then let's see who hits the button first. In that moment, every eye, every camera, every heart was locked onto these two men, two brothers, who once built a dream together, now standing in a public battle between truth and deceit. Mason stared at Ethan, his finger trembling slightly. His eyes betrayed a flicker of panic before returning to coldness. But Ethan saw it, and so did everyone watching. At that moment, Ethan knew he had regained control. As the entire room held its breath, Mason's finger hovered over the post button like a sword ready to fall, one tap away from unleashing a storm that would wipe out Ethan's reputation in minutes. But Ethan did not back down. He stood tall, holding up the phone, playing the video of Mason handing out envelopes and instructing people to stage scenes. The screen's glow reflected across the room, revealing Mason's face in the video, and his clear words: spill the wine, live stream, scream, curse Ethan, everyone gets paid, just make him look like a fool. The woman who had screamed about the spilled wine now trembled, her face pale, inching toward the door. "You still want to hit that button?" Mason Ethan asked, his voice low, but each word firm as steel. "Or do you want me to go first?" Mason's grip on his phone tightened, sweat beading on his forehead. "You think you can win this?" His voice cracked at the end. Ethan stared into his brother's eyes, no longer afraid, only a cold calm remaining. He pressed, "Go live." The words appeared on the screen. "You are now live." The viewer count rose rapidly. 30, 200, 1, 200, 300. Ethan lifted his phone high, panning the camera around the restaurant, the tables with real customers, the trembling fake customers, the faces looking down. He turned the phone back to himself, his voice carrying through the room. "Hello, I'm Ethan Mallory, owner of Mallory's Table. Maybe tonight you've seen live streams and videos deliberately edited to ruin my name and the names of the people who work day and night to keep this place alive." He paused, letting his breath settle, his eyes looking directly into the camera. "I'm not perfect. We're not perfect. But I have never lied to anyone, and I will not stay silent while the truth is twisted." Ethan turned the camera, playing the video of Mason handing out envelopes. Mason's voice clear: "Spill wine, scream, live stream, curse Ethan." Mason's face: undeniable, on screen, in the live stream. Comments began flooding in. What the hell is this? OMG, he's exposed. This is the real story. Ethan turned the phone back to himself, looking into the camera. His voice low but strong. This is the truth. The person behind all these fake live streams, these staged scenes meant to destroy me and this restaurant, is my brother. He turned the camera to Mason, zooming in on his pale face. Mason raised his hand, trying to cover his face, but Ethan lowered the camera just enough so everyone could still see him. "Ethan, you don't understand. This will ruin both of us," Mason shouted, his eyes bloodshot. "No, Mason," Ethan replied, his eyes sharp as ice, his voice calm. "Only those who choose lies will be ruined." Outside, police sirens wailed, red and blue lights flashing through the restaurant windows. Chloe ran from behind the bar, whispering, "I called them. They have the footage, the staff's statements, the real customers' testimonies." Mason stepped back, panic in his eyes. "You won't dare. You can't." The restaurant doors swung open, and 2 officers stepped in, their flashlights cutting through the room. "Mason Mallory, you are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and inciting public disorder." The fake customers began to panic, some raising their hands, some trying to flee toward the door only to be blocked. The real customers stood, stepping aside for the officers, their eyes on Ethan, full of quiet support. Mason struggled, screaming, "I built Mallory's table. I'm the one who deserves it, I." Cold steel handcuffs snapped around his wrists, the click sounding like a final punctuation mark. Ethan ended the live stream, lowering his head for a moment, exhaling deeply. The room fell silent, broken only by the gasps of those exposed, and the faint clink of metal as Mason was led away. Ethan lifted his head, catching Chloe's eyes. She nodded, her eyes red but filled with hope. The real customers began to clap, slowly, each clap echoing like confirmation. You did the right thing. Online. Ethan's live stream began spreading rapidly, comments pouring in. Respect, Ethan. This is what a brave CEO looks like when facing the truth. No one has the right to destroy another's dignity with lies. Ethan walked over to Chloe, pulling a silver key from his pocket and placing it in her hand. "Tomorrow, you'll open the doors for me. Mallory's table needs someone like you." Chloe's eyes welled up, her lips pressing together as she nodded, gripping the key tightly in her hand. Ethan turned back to look at the restaurant, the home he had built with every ounce of his heart, every brick, every warm yellow light. Today it had become a battlefield, but he had protected it with truth, courage, and humanity. The restaurant door closed behind Mason, leaving a long, quiet emptiness. The police sirens faded, and the flashing lights no longer cast restless shadows on the warm yellow walls of Mallory's table. Ethan stood still, arms hanging at his sides, breathing heavily, cold sweat on his forehead. The adrenaline drained, leaving behind a dull ache in his shoulders and spine, reminders of the battle he had fought to stay calm during the storm. Chloe stepped forward, gently resting her hand on his arm. "It's over now, Ethan," she said softly, her voice trembling but steady. "It's over." Ethan turned to look at her, meeting her steady brown eyes, reflecting in the ceiling lights. No longer the timid server, but someone who would carry the flame forward. He nodded, saying nothing, but his eyes said it all. "Thank you." The phone in Ethan's pocket buzzed relentlessly, with messages, calls, and email notifications flooding in like a waterfall. He pulled out his phone, seeing social media exploding. Ethan's live stream counterattack had reached over 2 million views in just a few hours, with tens of thousands of comments flooding in every minute. "I watched everything. This is the truth. We'll be back at Mallory's table. A CEO who stands up for the truth. I respect that. Don't let the liars win." Ethan scrolled through the comments, his hand shaking slightly, emotion tightening in his throat. He had never sought this kind of support. All he wanted was to protect his dream, protect the people who trusted him, protect the memory of his mother smiling in the corner booth as she watched the two brothers argue over a sauce recipe. A private message popped up from a regular customer. "I'll be bringing my family back for dinner. We believe in you." Another message came from a former employee. "I left because I thought you changed. But now I see you're still the Ethan I believed in." Ethan took a deep breath, eyes stinging, tears welling up. But he held them back. Not now, not here. He turned to Chloe and softly said, "Tomorrow, we open on time." She smiled, tears rolling down her cheeks, but her lips still curved upward. "Yes, boss." Ethan let out a soft laugh, a strange sound echoing in the space that had just weathered a storm. He couldn't remember the last time he had laughed like that. The next morning, Mallory's table opened its doors again. Ethan arrived early, standing at the glass door, looking into the warm space inside. The chairs were neatly arranged, the white tablecloths crisp, and the morning sunlight streamed through the windows, glinting off the gold lettering of Mallory's table like a promise. "This is home." A line of customers waited outside. There were elderly couples, young families, construction workers in uniforms, all standing there, looking at Ethan, nodding, smiling. A little boy tugged at his mother's hand, whispering, "Mom, is he a hero?" The mother bent down, smoothing the boy's hair. "Yes, honey, he's someone who stood up for the truth." Ethan stepped forward, opened the door, and the sunlight fell across his face, warm and bright. He smiled, his voice clear. "Welcome back to Mallory's table." Applause broke out, not loud but steady, each clap like the heartbeat of trust returning. Customers walked in, laughter and conversation gradually filling the space that had once been haunted by malicious live streams. Chloe stood behind the counter, wearing a new apron, with a name tag pinned to her chest, Chloe, manager. She looked at Ethan, nodded, and began taking orders, her smile radiating a warmth that reassured the customers. Ethan walked into the kitchen, seeing the staff bustling to prepare breakfast. They paused for a moment when they saw him, then nodded in unison, and the eldest among them said, "Let's make it good today, so people remember why they came back." Ethan nodded, squeezing the man's shoulder lightly, his eyes sweeping over the kitchen, the bubbling pots, the knives chopping onions, the faint scent of cinnamon waffles. This was life. This was breath. This was hope. In his heart, Ethan thought, "Mason, no matter what path you choose, I will always wish you peace. But this place, this dream, will not be destroyed by lies." And in the depths of Ethan's heart, he could almost hear his mother's voice, like a soft breath. "You kept your promise, Ethan." On the third day after the storm, Mallory's table's lights still shone. The crowd wasn't as large as on the reopening day, but it was steady and genuine. They didn't come out of curiosity or to film for clicks. They came to support Ethan, to support a place that dared to stand for truth in a world full of cheap lies. Ethan stood at the bar, holding a hot cup of coffee, watching customers come and go, listening to the sound of spoons stirring in cups, the giggles of children receiving free cookies from Chloe. The air was peaceful and warm, like those early mornings when Ethan and Mason would sit together, planning the day ahead. That afternoon, Mallory's table was packed, the soft clink of cutlery, laughter, the calling out of orders, the aroma of hot chicken soup blending with ginger cookies and rich coffee. Amidst the warm noise, Ethan stood still for a moment, closing his eyes. He heard his mother's laughter in his memory, Mason's excited voice reading the menu, and his own 20-year-old self saying, "One day, this place will be a light in the dark for those who need it." When he opened his eyes, that light was still shining, and he knew life could bring storms. People could lie, betray, and deceive. But as long as you have the courage to hold on to the truth, no one could take the fire from your heart. Mallory's table would not just be a restaurant. It would stand as proof for anyone who had ever been misunderstood, surrounded by lies, or ready to give up. To know the truth doesn't need protection. It only needs us not to abandon it. And if one day you feel alone in your fight to hold on to the truth, remember this: on a small street corner, there was once a man named Ethan Mallory who did not back down, so you can believe that you too can stand firm.